Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we have an episode of Commander's 2 Cents. On episodes like these, I give you my own personal take on topics about the format in general and current news. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the cost of your Commander collection. And yep, I mean you specifically. I've got your entire Commander collection laid out and I know exactly how much it costs. Okay, so I don't have that and it'd be impossible for me to do all that, much less to have a video that's specifically tailored to each and every single Commander player out there. Regardless, I kind of nerded out recently on some data and did a ton of digging, so you get to see the fruits of my labors. While I can't specifically talk about your Commander collection, I can talk about some generalizations about Commander collections. Essentially, how big are Commander collections, how much money are in those collections, and so on and so forth. In other words, these are the questions that we really want answers to. Or maybe it's just me. Regardless, this is interesting stuff, come on. Anyways, to start my quest for these answers, I started with a survey that some of you might recognize. When someone tells you that they've got a short survey and it's going to take you no time to fill it out, many times that is not quite the case. But with my survey, many of you found out that this was the case. It was a very simple survey with just 2 questions. And those questions were, how many Commander decks do you currently own, and do you use proxies for any of your decks? Again, very simple, straightforward, and easy, and thank you to every single person who filled out the survey. I really do appreciate it. And at the time of this recording, there were over 15,000 responses to the survey, so again, thank you all so much. Now, I don't have any kind of math or analytics or surveyology degree or whatnot. But I do think that this number is a pretty good sample size and you can pull some representative data from it. But again, I'm not a data scientist or anything like that, so let's just go with it. But let's just jump into that data with our very first question, which again was, how many Commander decks do you currently own? So with that question, you had a drop down with the options from all the way from 1 down to 40 plus. Why I put all those numbers there, I don't know. I thought it was a good idea at the time. But believe it or not, I got a response at every single option. So yes, there are multiple players out there that own exactly 39 decks. Now looking back, it was probably a little unnecessary to go that high. When I was analyzing the data, I probably could have simplified the high end to just 10 plus. But that's okay because I can just simplify it for you. So instead of listing 40 different numbers in my chart, I'm just going to show you 10. But before I get into these charts, I just want to make a quick disclaimer. Again, this data is not perfect. Over 15,000 people might have filled out the survey, but there are more than 15,000 Commander players out there. Again, I do think with a number of responses like that, it could be statistically significant, but just keep all that in mind, please. I'm not a data scientist, I'm just a content creator, so bear with me. So this pie chart shows you a breakdown of what percentage of players own a certain number of decks. I'm just going to list out the numbers, then we can talk about them in more detail. So at 1 deck, we've got 7.3%, at 2 decks, we've got 11, 3 decks, we've got 13.3, 4 decks, we've got 12.5, 5 decks, we've got 11.6, 6 decks, we've got 9.3, 7 decks, we've got 6.6, 8 decks, we've got 5.7, 9 decks, we've got 3.4, and 10 plus decks, we've got 19.4. And now that I'm out of breath, let's talk about what all this means. So first off, a data point that I thought was interesting is that over 92% of Commander players own multiple decks. Another is that the highest percentage of Commander players own 10 plus. Now, in some ways, that 10 plus decks is kind of cheating because it includes multiple numbers in there, whereas all the other numbers are individual. It's still an interesting data point, but for looking at specific deck numbers, we might have to take it out for this chart. That being said, at 13.3, the most common number of decks that a Commander player owns is 3. But there are some close percentages to that one with 2 decks, 4 decks, 5 decks, and probably even 6 decks. In fact, if you combine all those, the majority of Commander players own between 2 and 6 decks. But perhaps a more fair comparison is looking at the chart this way. 31.7% of Commander players own between 1 and 3 decks. 33.3% of Commander players own between 4 and 6. 15.7% of Commander players own between 7 and 9. And again, 19.4% of Commander players own 10 plus decks. Personally, it's a little easier for me to look at the data in this way than the previous one. To me, it looks like there's a decent percentage of players that have just a few decks between that 1 and 3 amount at 31.7%. Another third of the pie has a moderate amount of decks between 4 and 6 of that 33.3%. But then there's kind of a drop off with that 7 to 9. The percentage is even higher at 10 plus than it is at 7 to 9, which basically says this to me. There's a good amount of players that like to have just a few decks or a moderate amount of decks. But then once you start getting into players that really like building decks and having a lot of them, they've got a ton of them. So most of them don't stop at 7, 8, or 9, but they just keep building and they go into the 10 plus. Again, not a data scientist, I'm sure there are plenty of ways that I'm analyzing this incorrectly, but that's just what I'm pulling from it. They're just fun observations, so please don't yell at me in the comments too much. One number that I can tell you from all this though is that the average number of decks that a player has is 6.7. Those players that build 10 plus decks can definitely pull that number up. We'll get back to this number in a bit as we're going to use it later, but now let's move on to our next question. And that question was, do you use proxies for any of your decks? In the description of that question I said, for example, if you own one Gaea's Cradle but want to use it in more than one deck without buying more. Essentially, in any of your decks, you have at least one card that is a proxy. And the results actually surprised me a decent amount. 59.8% of Commander players do not use proxies in any of their decks, but 40.2% of Commander players do. I don't know why, but before getting those results, I thought that yes percentage would be a little bit lower. Now, proxying in Commander has been a debated topic for a while. I'm not going to get into that today, maybe on another episode, but not today. But essentially, with this question, I was trying to determine how much of those decks that people have are proxied or not. Now, I definitely should have added some questions onto that one if someone does proxy. If I were to go back and do it again, I'd also ask about how many proxies do you use in a deck? Do you just proxy that Gaea's Cradle because you own it elsewhere, or you don't even own it elsewhere, or you just proxy your entire deck? There are definitely other questions that I could have and probably should have added, but I didn't, and that's okay. But anyways, I didn't just stop with those survey questions, I dug into some data on EDHREC. Now, one thing really quick before I get into that EDHREC data though. Much like my survey, EDHREC does not have perfect data. EDHREC gets data from Archidekt, DeckStats, MTG Goldfish, and Scryfall. Notably, they don't get data from Tapped Out. Also, not all players use deck building websites, and not all decks that are on those websites are actually ones that are built in person. So obviously it's impossible for EDHREC to know things that it possibly can't know. That being said, EDHREC has the best Commander data out there that I've found, and they do a fantastic job. But again, like the survey, when I'm mentioning numbers here, just keep all that in mind and take everything with a grain of salt. The things that we can learn from all this data can be very interesting, even though it's not 100% accurate. That being said, let's move on to the data that I pulled from EDHREC with legit commanders and average deck cost. Essentially going into this, my goal is to find the average deck cost for each and every single commander in, well, Commander. Now you might be wondering what a legit commander is, and we'll get to that here in a second. As for the average deck cost, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware on how I got to the cost. I use the same process that I use on my deck text for the average EDHREC deck cost. So I take the average EDHREC deck for a commander, I optimize it on TCG Player as I normally would do for the channel with heavily played and damage cards included. As always, basic lands are not included, but I decided to include all commander costs, even ones that are above $10. I make that distinction on deck text for commander excluded episodes, but not here. Anyways, back to legit commanders. I'm sure you're still wondering on what a legit commander is. Well, it's something that I made up in going through this data. Basically, in order for a commander to be considered legitimate, they have to have at least 100 decks on EDHREC. I essentially instituted this minimum because I want to ensure that the deck cost was a bit more legitimate. Or at least 100 decks was legitimate enough for me, but again, I'm no mathematician, so whatever. Essentially, I went through the nearly 1,000 commanders out there and individually typed out how many decks each one had. Yes, this took some time. The commanders that had 100 or more decks out there, I did that optimization to get their average deck cost. The commanders that had 99 or less decks, I did not include. Again, the more decks that are out there for a commander, probably the more accurate that average deck cost is. And a commander like Rashka the Slayer has 0 decks, so I have no way of knowing that cost. And Zahid Djinn of the Lamp has 35 decks, and that's not enough for me. And my apologies to poor Sapling of Kolfner, you just missed the cut, maybe next time. So after doing all that, I've got some pretty cool numbers to check out, and the first is the number of legit commanders. So out of all the commanders in Magic, there are 488 on EDHREC that hit that 100 deck minimum. Between all those legit commanders, they account for 280,446 decks. Again, some of those commanders might have 100 decks, and some might have thousands. Now, I did mention that I did get average deck prices for each and every single one of those 488 legit commanders. And yes, that took some time to do, but you're worth it. Anyways, if you take the number of decks that a commander has and you multiply the average deck cost for that commander, you get the total cost of all that commander's decks. Again, disclaimer, these are estimations, blah, 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 blah. Regardless, you add up all those total costs for all the commanders with all their decks and you get this number. And that would be $99,198,457.48. I don't know about you, but I think that's a ton of money. So essentially, all the legit commanders on EDH Rec account for nearly $100 million with all their decks. Now to me that's pretty incredible, but let's use this number in a different way. Divide this number by the total number of decks, we get an average of about $353 per deck. So essentially, on average, a commander deck can be expected to be about $353 or so. So yeah, my $50 decks are looking pretty budget friendly right now. Anyways, this is where we take the data from our survey and we add it to this EDH Rec data. I mentioned earlier that according to the survey, on average, commander players have 6.7 decks per person. So if we take the average number of decks that a player has and we multiply by the average deck cost, we get this. On average, a player's commander collection comes in at $2,369.90. Now when I say commander collection, I'm just referring to the commander decks that they currently own. So if they've got boxes of cards elsewhere, or if they took a deck apart and they're just using it for spare parts in other decks and they haven't used every single one of those cards, that's not included. The average commander player has this amount invested in their decks. Now keep in mind that this also doesn't include proxies though. Again, there are a ton of factors that come into play with getting to this number. Obviously, it's impossible to find out an exact number for this. Still, I think I had a decently sound way of going about getting to this, so you can just let me know in the comments how I was wrong. Anyways, at this number though, yes, you can have 6.7 decks at like $350 per deck. Or if you wanted to, you could go the budget route and have 47 decks at $50 each. Now, some of you might be thinking, hey, wait, that 6.7 was just an average. That's not necessarily representative. And you're correct. So if you want to look at the most common number of decks per person, which was 3, and you multiply that by the average, you get $1,061.16. Still over $1,000 in your collection, or in other words, it would be 21 decks at $50 each. Just saying. But let's just say that you just want 3 decks and you don't want 21. You could just get 3 decks for $150. But I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to show you the numbers. Anyways, I know that the method going about finding these numbers was not perfect, but it is actually impossible to find the exact numbers out there. So because of that, I hope that you still found this interesting and feel like that you got some good insights from it. But with all that said, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts are on the cost of commander collections. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck tags. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tag dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.